We're really energized by being part of this energy transition story. I really think it will tap into a lot of the resources of Houston. Our leadership is really focused on it, and I think we're going to see what happens when people in Houston come together.
Thanks for tuning in to Forging the Future, and I'm excited to have another major player in the Houston ecosystem, David Gow, founder and CEO of Gow Media and Sportman Tech Acquisition Corp. So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've enjoyed the show with others, and now to get to be here is really special.
You're behind the camera now, or in front of the camera.
That's right.
So, pleasure to meet you face to face. We've known each other for a little while here virtually, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. You've actually invested in companies contributing to the Houston ecosystem many different ways, right? And currently, but maybe tell me a little bit about your early career prior to you founding Gow Media as an entrepreneur.
As an entrepreneur, well, before Gow Media, I really wasn't too much of an entrepreneur. I had worked at McKinsey as a consultant, and then took a job at Compaq Computers. I was in the PC business in the 90s when things were really blowing and going. But I guess my first entrepreneurial experience was joining a .com in the early stages of e-commerce in the late 90s, Ashford.com, a B2C e-tailer of luxury goods. And then after we sold that, I was looking for what to do next and started Gow Media.
When you left Compaq to go to Ashford, was that a company you were founding, or how did you get involved? You took the red pill from Compaq, decided to jump into a startup. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
It was hard to leave Compaq because I really enjoyed it, but there were two founders in town. They really are the founders, James Whitcomb and Rob Shaw, who had founded what was then called newwatch.com, and they had a lot of momentum selling watches online. And watches were a great product to sell online because it was a recognizable brand behind the product, and the price points were higher. So the gross profit dollars per transaction were better than most e-tailers. And so those two guys really were the two founders, get full credit for founding the business, having that vision. And they hired me as the first outside hire. I came in as the chief financial officer during an incredible time. Back then, we were out raising money, of course, in the height of the e-commerce boom. Back then, I thought it was really easy to raise money. I was naive how easy it was, because it was a time when everybody was eager to get into those early stage e-commerce companies. And so I joined as the CFO. We immediately went out west and raised a lot of capital from Benchmark and Bowman Capital and Sequoia Capital. And we got all that VC funding. And then we went off and enlisted Goldman Sachs, and we went public. We had that crazy
How much money did you end up raising out in California?
On the private equity front, we raised about $60 million in total.
Wow.
And then when we went public at the IPO, we raised about $75 million.
And have you ever done that before, raised money?
At that point, no, I really had not gone out and raised any capital. And so that's why I think I was somewhat surprised. Wow, this is really easy, but that was an easy time. Obviously, it's much more difficult in normal times. But no, that was the first time I'd really gone out to raise the capital. And then the road show on the IPO was also a unique experience. We literally took planes, trains, and automobiles nearly all over the world in order to secure the $75 million and complete the IPO.
How many people did you have to talk to roughly to get that $75 million? How many meetings did you have?
We probably spent about 20 days on the road and met about 3 institutions during each of those 3. And so we probably met with about 60 people to get to the $75 million.
Yeah, I think that's an important point for a lot of startup founders. Think still that it's easy and that you only need to talk to a couple people, or maybe you get one that's going to come in and fill you around, even if it's just $1 million.
If only it were that way. No, it's never that easy.
And not that easy right now either. It's tough times. So you did that, you exited, and then you founded your company, or how did you, was that Gow at that point? I mean, how long has it been with Gow Media?
Right. So when we sold Ashford, I had about 2 years where I started consulting for small businesses. And I enjoyed that window, but I was often consulting with businesses that were very early stage and were really struggling with that challenge that all small businesses have. They didn't have the capital to secure management, and they didn't have the management to go get the capital. And so I was helping them with business plans and raising capital. And along the way, somebody introduced me to John Granato and a business partner of his. John Granato, a longstanding morning show host, he was very excited about a radio station that had become available in the city. And you may know radio stations are rarely available for sale because they've been bought up by consolidators. One was on the market, and he was very excited to buy it and sort of be the founding entrepreneur behind the launch of a new station.
And this is early 2000s, or where was this?
This was now around 2005 and 6.
Okay.
We started that dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while, both to raise the money, but also to get through the FCC approval process. When you buy an FCC licensed station, there's a process to get through. And we did it, and we were excited to launch it. John knew everything about radio, but he needed help with the business plan and raising capital. I could help on the business plan and raising capital, and I didn't know anything about radio, but we joined forces and were able to put together the plan that led to the birth, well, the buying of the first station, and then therefore the birth of Gow Media and the other things we wanted to go and do.
Mm. Why was he so excited about buying a radio station?
Well, John had been in radio for a long time, was very, very popular. He and his partner, Lance Zerline, in Morning Drive had been the #1 sports talk show in the city for a long time. And importantly, he not only had a big audience, he also had a big advertising following. And that combination of audience and advertisers that we had conviction he could bring over in a startup was really enticing. And so why did he want to do it? I think he had that entrepreneurial itch. He'd been working for big corporate, and he thought, no, I can do it on my own, and I can capture more value by doing it on my own. I can bring the audiences and the advertisers over, and we can build something from scratch.
And that was an AM station?
The first one was in AM. We've eventually migrated over to the FM band.
What was the AM station? Just curious.
Yeah. No, the station is 1560.
Mm-hmm.
We called it 1560 The Game.
Okay.
It's 1560 AM. Today, it still exists. We still own it, but we are leasing it out to Viet Media, and they have Vietnamese programming. So they get to program it and sell advertising against it, and then they pay us a fixed fee as a lease on the station.
And then you moved to FM?
We moved to the FM. We thought, I mean, as you may know, listening trends over the last 5 to 10 years have migrated from AM to FM. And so when people turn on the radio and they have two doors in front of them, increasingly they're going FM. So we thought it would be strategic to flip from the AM band to the FM band.
Used to be for a while there, of course, a lot of talk shows went on AM, probably because the stations were struggling music-wise and they're looking for a niche. And so talk radio was AM, right? Is it still that way, or?
No, it still is. And the basis for that is that the FM band has better fidelity for music. And so the AM band has been relegated to talk. Mm-hmm. And it's still pretty much that way. But over time, I think you'll find that many more talk formats will work their way onto the FM band. So we are doing talk on FM, but there are many FM sports stations across the country, and we're the unique one in Houston.
Did you ever think you would head up a media company before
No, I had
then?
no idea that I was going to do a media company. I really haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up. When I do figure it out, I'll be sure to let you know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also an important point for a lot of founders is just understanding that sometimes the opportunities come along and you had no idea you were going to do it,
Right.
but kind of like seizing that chance and kind of diving in and say, well, maybe I do want to start a media company.
You bet.
Especially if you have a partner that knows a lot about media and, like you said, can get the start. And so now you fast forward, it's what, 20 years later almost, right?
Well, that's right. So we were committed to sports radio at that time, local sports radio. Then we had a chance to buy a company called Sporting News Radio, which is a national sports business, a business where we create sports shows and we syndicate them across the country. And so for 5 or 6 years, we were well positioned as a local sports and a national sports radio business. But in 2017, it was obvious we needed to spread our wings. We needed to shift from being purely radio and become more of a multi-platform media business. And a big determinant of that, or driver of that, was just that media dollars were shifting a little bit out of old media radio and into new media digital. And so that's when we took advantage of the opportunity to buy CultureMap.
Okay, so you acquired CultureMap. Were they a small business or something?
Yes, so CultureMap had been around for about 10 years. When we looked at it, CultureMap had a great brand. People loved CultureMap, large and loyal audience, when you go to their events, you see the embodiment of the large audience and the enthusiasm the audience has for the brand. And so we saw all those things, but CultureMap was struggling to monetize what they had built. They had great content and presence, but they didn't have enough sales resources, and they weren't selling ad campaigns as aggressively as they needed to. So we saw an opportunity to buy something that was struggling, throw some ad sales energy into it. We had a team of sellers already selling radio, and then we thought we'd hire some additional digital sellers, and we were able to form the sales team that made CultureMap a really good business for us.
How did you find them as an acquisition target? Did you say, hey, we want to acquire an alternate media company, and you had someone look for it? You just Google it, or how did you come across them?
So they actually found us in this case.
Really?
The owners were getting the itch to sell. And when they came to see us, it was the fall before the Super Bowl was coming to Houston. And so we started this conversation in the fall about a potential merger. But I really wasn't certain that CultureMap was the right fit. We were so steeped in sports, and then here came culture. Well, fast forward, what we decided to do as a way to sort of date before we would marry is we decided to throw a big Super Bowl party in Houston 2 days before the Super Bowl. And Super Bowl parties are always happening in the towns where the Super Bowl takes place. We did it with CultureMap and our ESPN radio station, and the combination of ESPN and CultureMap throwing a party was a home run. It was a really great thing. Of course, ESPN turned out mostly a male audience, our sports talk listeners, and CultureMap brought primarily a female audience, and we put them together. It was a great party, an over-the-top success, and at the conclusion of that week, it dawned on me, no, we would be far better together than if we remained apart. And so we completed the deal shortly after the Super Bowl.
Interesting. How much did culture itself play a factor in that acquisition? You had your media company, they had their culture. I think company culture, when I look at the HP Compaq merger, for example,
right.
Since
I was dealing with Compaq buying DEC and Tandem in those days, and there were cultural changes, absolutely.
Yeah. So how did that affect you at all, or did that factor into decision?
Well, if I'd really paid attention to it, it probably would have scared me away. and this is why. So the very first day after we had done the deal, we had all of our guys in sports talk radio, and clearly sports talk radio is mostly a male employee base, and we weren't doing any videos in studio then. So the radio host would come to work in shorts, t-shirts, flip-flops. If they combed their hair that day, I felt grateful. They were just sort of coming in, but they're doing radio behind the scenes and they're talking sports. Mm-hmm. And that's how they came to work every day. And then they were all in a room, and in came the CultureMap, primarily females, and they looked great. They were dressed well. They were cultured, right? They had attractive outfits, and they came in, and I remember looking at this bundle of people over on one side and that bundle of people on the other side. And I thought, wow, we've got a big divide. It was a cultural challenge to uniting those two businesses.
Yeah, I remember when, of course, I was doing a lot of work for Compaq during the acquisition when HP bought them, which actually turned out not to be great for SoftType because we were doing so much work for the printer division. And one thing HP didn't need was Compaq printers.
Right.
But anyway, that's another story. But I remember Compaq being a very email-first culture. They were one of the first companies really embracing email. They used Banyan internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which didn't even have an external, component
right.
at that point, or just started to have external. I remember emailing someone at HP, and they called me back and left me a voicemail message, and I'm like, this is different, right?
Yes.
So HP was very much a pick up the phone call. Mm-hmm. Compaq was very much an email culture. So, but that's interesting. So maybe a good thing you didn't think too hard about.
Yeah, it would have scared me away, but I'm so glad we did it, and it's worked out really well to have CultureMap with ESPN Sports. And when you think about it, there is a huge intersection between sports and culture in our society. The Super Bowl that we did where we did the great party, that's probably the best illustration of the intersection of sports and culture, because Super Bowl is obviously a sport moment, but it's a huge cultural moment. And so we're able to witness that intersection, and we see it every day. There are all kinds of stories that we write that live at the intersection of sports and culture.
And now you've kind of expanded this this map brand, right? Maybe tell me a little bit about how that came about. You had CultureMap,
Mm-hmm.
and now you've kind of jumped with both feet into like the map as an expansion, right?
No, you bet. So CultureMap, a great online platform with coverage of lifestyle content, food, fun, festivals, art, music, society, travel, CultureMap. And once we got it to a place where we really liked how it was performing, we looked across the room and we had all these sports people in the building. It just made sense to launch a brother site to CultureMap, which we called SportsMap. And that takes, it enables us, what we can do is we take a lot of those hosts from radio and they come down and they either write written content or they'll do videos that we place on the SportsMap site. And then we got the conviction to launch InnovationMap, which is our third digital platform. And so we sit now with the three. And what we like to say is our three digital content sites don't dive into the nasty, negative political topics of the day. We don't cover the hard news. What we provide to our audiences is topics of passion. Our audiences are passionate about food and culture in the restaurant scene. Certainly there's sports teams, and people are passionate about innovation in this city. And so that's the place we like to be. We're the map to those fun, different categories.
Is it just local to Texas, or is it in U.S.?
Yeah, so CultureMap is in the 5 cities of Texas, but we've not gone outside Texas yet.
I see. Well, I mean, if Texas was a country, it would be number 8 in GDP, right? So, I mean, I think there's plenty to mine in that area.
Right.
I get the move from CultureMap to SportsMap, but why did you go to InnovationMap?
So some of that was born out of the energy in this city, the enthusiasm in the city to build tech ecosystems and startup development organizations, and the feeling that Houston was getting shortchanged on recognition for what we're doing with tech and entrepreneurial activity. And so we met with, it was actually Houston Exponential knocked on our door, and Exponential had a strong conviction that the city needed a media outlet that would tell the stories of successes, so that when the Greater Houston Partnership, when Houston Exponential, when anybody wanted to tell the story about the tech community in Houston and the entrepreneurial ecosystems in Houston, there would be one platform where they could point and there'd be a repository of stories. And that's what gave birth to InnovationMap. It's not that InnovationMap or the media outlet is the catalyst or creating the change, but we can fan the flames. We can tell the stories and bring a spotlight to all the great things that are happening in this city.
Amplify it. Right?
That's right.
Yeah, there were some comments. I don't know if you saw them. Paul O'Brien was talking about this very thing, about the need to get the story out.
You bet.
Right? As part of the whole ecosystem.
You
and
bet.
There needs to be more of that. And InnovationMap's been a big supporter of the ecosystem. Talked to Natalie several times, and she's been great about, getting Soft Tech Venture Studios and Soft Tech Stories out. So, in fact, I talked to her at South by a couple weeks back.
You bet.
And she's been great.
And I might say that it's really amazing to me when we think back. It wasn't that long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we started InnovationMap. But at that time, the Canon was just starting. Remember, they had that waiting room. They were still building out the facility. The Canon wasn't here yet. Ion wasn't here yet. Greentown wasn't here yet. All these great things have happened in the last 4 to 5 years, and it's taken the efforts of many. It's taken a village, but great leadership. And I give a lot of credit to Houston Exponential and the Greater Houston Partnership for pushing the growth and fostering the growth of those kind of organizations.
Did it feel too early to be starting InnovationMap at that point? Because it's like, just like you said, where were the stories?
Right.
So
too early would be too strong. But it was early, but we could see the momentum. There was a trajectory happening. The blueprint for the Ion was out there. And I just had this gut instinct that there would be a real wave of excitement and growth in the city, in the tech and entrepreneurial and the ecosystem development. And so we had the conviction 4 to 5 years ago, though it was early. And now it's really borne out. We've got wonderful organizations across the city in this realm.
Was that partly being, due to being an entrepreneur, as almost like a give back project, at least at the start? I would imagine if you looked at a lot of the different possible domains out there, that one maybe would have trailed some of the other opportunities that you could have had with the Map brand. Right?
Well, that's fair. It wasn't as big a category as some of the other things we could have done or we still hope to do. I mean, we've got on the shelf as a blueprint, a plan to do something like wellness map to cover all things wellness. You can imagine mental, physical wellness, all those sorts of beauty and fitness. Outdoors map covering hiking, biking, fishing, camping. Those are great commercial opportunities, but no, InnovationMap did resonate. I was very sympathetic to it. And then, not to be lost, the way that HX came into my office and started pitching this idea that maybe we could launch the media outlet was because my son Lawson, who was the founder of the Canon at the time, brought them in. And because of his role at the Canon, I was getting a front row seat. I had a lot of visibility into what was coming in Houston and the progress that was happening all over the city.
Is the Canon underneath Gow Media, or is it something totally separate with Lawson?
One of the nice things is that I get credit for the Canon all the time. First of all, Lawson was the founder.
Yeah, okay.
I'm an investor in Work America Capital, Mark Toon's entity that is an investor in the Canon. So I'm a small owner of the Canon, but I love to take as much credit for it as I can. But no, Lawson really was the founder, and now he's moved on to other things. But the Canon is doing great, and it's vibrant and full, and there are wonderful programs going on at the Canon right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has been amazing to see the progress that Houston has made in the startup ecosystem over the last 5 years, and no small part to your help as well. Do you see that, we're going to continue this momentum in Houston, or what the opportunities are moving forward?
No, so I do. The one thing I think happens is success begets success. Things get to be self-perpetuating. We're on the map now. I think that, no pun intended with our
rim shot.
No, that was not my intention. But the point is, I do think that when entrepreneurs are considering different cities and places to locate and where they can attract talent and all the resources you need to win, Houston is much further along, much more appealing than it was 4 to 5 years ago. The other thing is I think we've got a whole new wave of excitement here. If 4 to 5 years ago, the effort was to build entrepreneurial ecosystems that were sort of industry agnostic, now there seems to be a real focus on certain industry verticals. Probably the biggest and most prominent now is this work to transition Houston from being the longstanding oil and gas capital of the world to now becoming the energy capital of the world. And that's a wonderful initiative for the city. It's an imperative for the city. Obviously, the Great Houston Partnership has formed the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, HETI, and HETI is pulling a lot of the same levers that Exponential did to develop those ecosystems. So I have a lot of confidence that this next wave of growth and excitement in the development of our ecosystems will center on energy transition. And to round it out, just as we created InnovationMap to support the development of entrepreneurial ecosystems 4 or 5 years ago, we've announced we're going to launch a media platform to tell the stories of energy transition, as I think that's the next big wave and a really strong need for the city to exert leadership with energy transition.
Interesting. Did you name it yet?
We have named it. It's Energy Capital,
okay.
HTX.com. And so we did not give it the name MAP. So it's a little bit. I
guess Energy Map, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an outlier name-wise, and a little bit of an outlier in the sense it's a little trickier business for us. One of the great things about the other 3 platforms, as I've said, is that we never go into the political realm. We don't want to go into the political realm with Energy Capital. Our ambition is to be informative, insightful, educational, but not take one of these strident positions that are out there. And we hope to be really constructive in that regard. However, it'll be a tougher platform to stay out of politics because energy transition has politics innate to the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think Houston is in a good position to become the energy capital of the world. Microsoft, I was at the Microsoft opening of their demo facility, which is right near our studio, actually, in the city center. And we're starting to work a lot with Microsoft now. Obviously, they're very interested in sustainability. And SoftTech is one of the leading contributors now in the Open Footprint Forum. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of momentum. I agree with you. And there should be a lot of stories to tell around that as we hopefully lead the rest of the country and the world on how do we move from oil and gas to alternative energy. And it's going to happen.
No, it's going to happen. Whether you want it to happen or not, whether you believe it needs to happen or not, it's going to happen. So it's imperative that the city position for it. Obviously, lots of jobs are at stake, economic growth. This city needs to be a leader in that space and will. And the stories we'll be telling will include what big energy companies like Exxon is doing. Exxon is going to be a leader in carbon capture and therefore very much an important part of reducing carbon emissions. And we're going to cover what small companies are doing, the companies at Greentown are doing that are innovations that will enhance alternative energies that don't have carbon emissions. And so I think it's very exciting to see small companies, big companies, and the different ways that we're all working toward a common goal of reducing carbon emissions.
So one of the things I really like to talk about is collisions and how they happen. And so we met at the InnovationMap Award Gala, right? So maybe tell me a little bit about that.
Well, you were kind enough to sponsor it or be part of it, and I appreciate SoftTech's support. We did meet then. That's a great night because obviously we're celebrating many of the great entrepreneurial businesses in the city, and we're doing it by different categories. Best female-led business, best new energy business, best this and that. It's a really great night, a fun celebration of the ecosystem in the city. We did this year's at the Ion, and that was a great opportunity to meet you. And I remember that was a great collision, which led to my getting to come to your demo day. And I remember being so impressed by the value proposition of what you've created, in that I have come across so many young businesses that need tech development, and they take in their venture capital and then they spend all their money on the tech. And if it costs too much money and takes too long, that can be the death knell of many a venture. And you guys have created an approach that I think is just spot on to helping overcome that tech leap, to get across that chasm of a problem, to get the tech to a good solution and mitigate the risk. So I was very impressed by hearing what SoftTech was doing, and therefore excited to come to your demo day.
Well, we have new round of startups, I think 14, where we're going to have demo days in Austin, Dallas, and in Houston.
Well, I want an invitation. I got to be there.
That you
I enjoyed the first one.
You get the link. And then one other thing I wanted to know more about is this SPAC you launched and IPO'd. We really haven't had anybody on the show that knows about anything SPAC related or has created a SPAC, IPO'd a SPAC. So what is a SPAC?
Sure. Well, of course, SPAC is an acronym, Special Purpose Acquisition Corp. And they are an investment vehicle where some people come together and effectively create a hollow business and take it public. And so we created a hollow company, went public on NASDAQ, and raised $117 million. And the promise of a SPAC is that we tell all the investors in the $117 million IPO, the promise is that we're going to take that capital and we're going to go acquire a business with some industry focus. And so we created a special purpose acquisition corp to focus on acquiring something in sports tech. And of course, when you're raising the money, since you don't have an operating business to talk about, really you're raising the money on the backs of the individuals or the backgrounds of the individuals, or the promise that these individuals can figure out something smart to do with the capital. And so I was very fortunate we were able to put together a great board, a great group, blue chip group that included Reed Ryan, former president of the Astros, Oliver Luck, who had been president of the Dynamo and commissioner of the XFL, David Graff, who started a great sports tech company called Huddle, Hudl. It's the online platform where all high school sports videos go. Steve Webster, a great private equity investor in the city, and I was the chairman of the SPAC. And of course, I've got a sports media business that could be all part of a sports story for our sports special purpose. And on that group, we were able to raise the $117 million with the promise we'd go find a business. And that gave birth to an 18-month timeline, which is what you get with a SPAC, to go and find a merger partner. And so it's been a big undertaking over the last year.
How did that come together? That's some great names, but I mean, did you just run into each other at a restaurant, decide to start a SPAC, or like who initiated like, hey, this might be a good idea?
So I'd been reading about SPACs as an investment vehicle, and I got pretty attracted to the idea of doing a SPAC, point one. And then the second was, well, what category, what industry, what special purpose? And coming out of sports, I'd gotten to know Oliver Luck. I'd gotten to know Reed Ryan because we'd been talking to them about their sports leadership, their properties that they had been leading. And Lawson knew David Graff because David Graff of Huddle at one point was coming around looking at Houston as a possible destination, and he toured the Cannon. So we reached out to Graff. And so, no, it was about calling up people I knew in the sports space and asking them to be interested in participating in this opportunity. And thankfully, we got them all together because honestly, this is one of those things where it took the whole of whom we could assemble, that group, to be able to go out and raise the capital. It was another roadshow. It was an easier roadshow. Interestingly, versus the Ashford.com roadshow, it was planes, trains, and automobiles all over the world. The IPO roadshow for the SPAC was all virtual, and we knocked it out with about 4 calls a day for about 8 days, and all of a sudden we'd raised the money. So it's a very different business, and Reed Ryan was great. He joined me on the roadshow, so he and I did the pitch together, and it was a great completion of that IPO effort.
So it's a lot like raising a venture fund, it sounds like, and you're making these calls over a week's time, right? Wow, $100 million, that's great. Kudos for that. But you have a number of essentially LPs in this investment vehicle then?
Right.
And they're all writing checks. How many LPs roughly?
Yeah, the distinction it's worth making is that before you go do the IPO, and you know you're going to be a public company soon, what happens with the SPAC is you have to go raise insider capital. Effectively, it's called risk capital. And we raised $5 million of risk capital from high net worth individuals in Houston. That gave birth to the filings and the work to go public. And that money has to pay the ongoing bills as a public company. So we write checks to the SEC, lawyers, accountants, D&O insurance, all the necessary costs of being public. With the IPO, we raised $117 million, and that money is placed in a trust. So I can't touch it. I've got $117 million at my disposal, but I can't get anywhere near it. And so that money is sitting there waiting for the transaction. And it's not until the transaction happens that we figure out what happens to that $117 million.
I see.
Those investors actually, when I present the company to them, they have the right to roll their money into the combination or take their money home, redeem it. And so that's a huge swing in the ultimate outcome of the SPAC.
So the initial fundraising effort was for the $5 million to cover that risk capital.
Yes.
That then allows you to take the SPAC public. The public then invests in the SPAC, and that's where you raise the $117 million.
Yep.
That gets put into a trust essentially, and now you got 18 months to try to figure out what are you going to go out and buy.
Yes.
And then the SPAC gets renamed or something like that,
That's
whatever
correct.
you end up to buy. Have you bought anything yet, or where are you at in the timeline?
So we have announced our deal.
Okay.
And we're working toward close. The irony is, though we raise money for sports and sports tech as our special purpose, and we must have talked to over 300 companies in that industry space, we have landed the plane on a deal with a company outside sports altogether. The company is called Infrared Cameras, Inc., and basically they're in the business. Infrared cameras, as you may know, monitor heat. They could discern whether I have a fever or whether any equipment in an industrial setting is overheating. And it's a great solution that they have, and it's a really exciting new growth category. And so we're going to merge with Infrared Cameras that provides industrial monitoring solutions.
How did that pivot come about?
The pivot happened, and this is a big pivot, because we had assembled a board for sports. We raised all our money on sports. We had a whole sports story, and we loved the sector, and we spent a lot of time on it. The pivot happened because the bloom was off the rose on SPACs. SPACs turned into a 4-letter word.
Yeah.
The investment vehicle that was so popular was now a pariah. And what that meant is that the $117 million that's sitting in trust waiting for my deal is almost certainly going to go away. Most of that money will be redeemed. When we could see it in other SPACs, when SPACs would perform their merger, very, very little money remained at close. And that created a huge problem because every company in sports or sports tech we talked to, we'd go up to them and say, let's merge, we'll get you public. They'd all be enthusiastic. And they'd say, well, how much money can you bring to close? Because when people go public, they like to secure a heavy dose of capital. And the answer, when the SPAC market collapsed and redemption rates soared to 95%, the answer is, I don't know that I have any money to bring to close. All I am is a vehicle to get you public. And that was a real struggle because many companies then said, well, I don't want to go forward with it. So we had to pivot and say, we've got to find a company, doesn't matter whether it's sports, it needs to be private, and it has to be a company that doesn't need a lot of capital because we're not going to be able to provide a lot of capital. So that led us to look at smaller businesses, and we took geographic scans in our search. We took different industry cuts in our look, and we found, here's the funny irony is, during the course of our search, we talked to companies in Australia, Japan, Asia, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Latin, North, South America, and we finally found our company, and it's down the road in Beaumont, Texas, right around the corner.
Well, that's great. It's a Texas business.
Yes, and it's a really intriguing business because, and you'll appreciate the analogy to the hardware or software business in the computing industry. For the past 20 years, this company's been around doing great work providing cameras, hardware only, to put in an industrial setting to monitor the overheating of equipment and prevent blowouts and damage. Just the hardware. This company is a leader now because it has a leading solution because it's added software to the mix, and the data from the software goes up to the cloud. And what that enables is continuous and remote monitoring of the equipment, as opposed to somebody having to go out and look at it manually.
Some AI ML on top or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the accumulation of all that data does give birth to AI and almost predictive elements that will be sort of the next generation of what the software does. But infrared cameras right now is the only party going out to industrial companies like large warehouse companies with large, long conveyor belts that can overheat. And they're the ones who can say, we're not going to provide you just hardware. We're going to offer you hardware and software, a solution. And they're selling it on a SaaS-based recurring revenue business model.
Interesting. Well, congrats to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that was quite difficult once SPACs fell apart a little bit. It sounds like you found a place to land. So maybe lastly, anything that you're looking forward to in the ecosystem currently in Houston, startup-wise, et cetera?
Well, we're really energized by being part of this energy transition story. I really think it will tap into a lot of the resources of Houston. Our leadership is really focused on it. And I think we're going to see what happens when people in Houston come together. Large corporate startups, we're all united across the spectrum of size and company for this opportunity to be the energy capital of the world over the next 10, 20, 30 years as transition happens. I really think this is the right focus for the city. And I think we're aligning all the right resources to get there.
I think it's going to be exciting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for everything you're doing in the ecosystem. I think I have something here for you over here. You know, I'm wearing my socks today. I have my grandkids, my two grandsons play baseball. I've got my baseball grandson socks on today, and I've got some baseball socks for you since you're a sports guy. And
yes.
So,
well, I was eyeing your socks, so now I can put some on myself.
My two grandsons. So I've got a baseball game to go to right after this. So.
Awesome.
And we'll get you the link to the demo day, and we'd be happy to have you out in Houston.
Well, I look forward to the demo day. I think the first one was great, and I know the next one will be as well.